Alright, well, I'm Trevor Wiegert, and this is my Assignment 8 teaching lesson dealing with a brief overview of the concepts of separation of powers and checks and balances found within the U.S. Constitution that pertains to how they affect our government and how things are run there. So, first off, separation of powers. Separation of powers is the act of delegating different powers within government to separate branches. Basically, what this means is there's not one branch that holds all the powers of the government. There are multiple branches, each holding different responsibilities, but in the end, they roughly hold equal weight in carrying out government procedure. This was basically done because the founding fathers, back in the early days of America, were escaping the British monarchy and what they felt was a very oppressive government that gave them no say in anything, and that's something they really wanted to get away from. They wanted a democracy that was very representative of the people and a government that would hold some power but would be kept in check and not grow too powerful like the British monarchy they had just fled from. So, the branches of government that were set up for the United States federal government are the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. And these are the three main branches of the federal government, and they also can be seen in smaller state and local governments as well. All right, first off, with the executive powers, the executive branch involves the president, vice president, and the cabinet, which involves positions such as the Secretary of State, the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General, so on and so forth. And the executive branch holds a variety of powers, such as the president being commander in chief of our armed forces. So he heads up all of the different branches, such as Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. All the military is under the president's command. He can also issue executive orders and other things like pardons. They can appoint the Supreme Court justices, and it is also their duty to enforce all laws in the land, no matter how they may feel about the laws. Whoops, sorry about that. It is, in the end, their job to make sure every law is enforced and carried out to the fullest. And these are just a sampling of the powers that the executive branch holds in our government. Onto the legislative branch. The legislative branch involves both the House of Representatives and the Senate, which together comprise the larger overall body of Congress. Now, the House of Representatives is set up to offer a proportionate amount of representatives for each state based on state population. And I believe total representation in this House comes to 435 representatives across the 50 states. For instance, states with larger populations like California and Texas and Florida have many more representatives in Congress than opposed to states with smaller populations such as Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota. And then the Senate, on the other hand, is comprised of 100 senators, two from each state. This was put in to give the smaller states a more equal balance in Congress. Anyway, on to the powers. Congress, in effect, yields power to draft and pass laws. This is their main function in government. They do other things as well as passing a budget, controlling the taxes and money. They also are the ones who and ultimately declare war on another country, and obviously some other powers are given to this legislative branch as well. And the judicial branch, finally, consists of basically the 9 members of the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land. And also states have Supreme Courts, but The judicial branch, Supreme Court, is the highest court in the land where all the major cases go to and laws are interpreted. So their powers are interpreting those laws passed by Congress. So basically, Congress passes a bill and it goes to the Supreme Court and they read over the law, interpret all the provisions given by the law, and ultimately decide if the entire law is constitutional and able to be put into effect and become a law of the land over the American people. And they also hear many important court cases that are deemed to have enough impact to be heard by the Supreme Court. Many of these landmark cases showcase changes in constitutional interpretation, how different provisions are applied to different cases, and these in turn affect the law of the land and how it affects different Americans all across the country. So they have a huge job as well in government. Now on to the other concept of checks and balances. Checks and balances basically are provisions set out in the Constitution to ensure that no one branch gains too much power, as each branch holds some power over the other branches. For instance, like the diagram you see below, each branch has power to keep the other two branches in check, basically creating a never-ending cycle where, if carried out properly, the three branches hold the same amount of power while also holding the same amount of power over each other. And like I said earlier, this was one of the Founding Fathers' big provisions for the Constitution. Like I said, to ensure that our American government was vastly different than the oppressive British monarchy that we had just disengaged from. So this was a huge provision that was set forth in the Constitution. And some different checks and balances, some examples here just to kind of give a brief overview of what we're talking about. So like I said, Congress, their main power is to pass laws. So the executive branch has the power to veto those passed laws. And if he believes they're not good for the American people, whatever it may be, he has the power to sign a veto saying, I don't want this law passed. And then on top of that, Congress can come back and check the president by coming back with a vote, with a certain number of votes from each branch of Congress, and they can in return overturn a presidential veto. So both cases there show a check and balance. And also the judicial branch, when they get laws passed by Congress, they can look at them and say, you know what, we think this is unconstitutional. It should not be applied to the American people. This should not be a law. So they have the ability to throw it out, and Congress would in effect have to go back to the drawing board and draw up a new law. Another example, the judicial branch has the power to rule executive actions unconstitutional. If they think the president or anyone in the cabinet is their actions are out of line, unconstitutional, whatever it may be, they have the power to rule those said actions unconstitutional and keep that branch in check. And reciprocally, the executive branch holds the power to appoint the Supreme Court justices. So they have a say in who goes on the Supreme Court to rule on all of these different cases of constitutionality. So both those examples I think are good to really show the different ways that the three branches are intertwined and connected and able to consistently hold power over each other and really keep things under control. Now, obviously, it's not a perfect system. There are still many times when one could say things get out of hand and one branch exercises maybe a little more power than they should have. But I think overall it's a great system, and it's really the best way to ensure that we keep the type of democracy that the founding fathers were seeking in the beginning of the nation. So, like I said, the importance of both of these concepts, separation of powers and checks and balances, they're two very critical components to what makes our democracy in the United States so unique and so different from really any other government that the world has ever seen. I think the founding fathers were well ahead of their time and well ahead of most other people in the world when they drafted up the Constitution and set up the government for the years to come. And obviously, there's much more depth to each of these concepts, but I believe this overview is a good introduction and helps to show how these two concepts were put into place to hold government responsible and give each branch an equal playing field. In effect, having our three different branches, all with different powers, but all carrying an equal weight in how government is carried out, and in the end, making sure that each one is held accountable and government is run to its maximum efficiency. So that is all for the lesson, and I hope this gives you a better understanding of, at least a better basic understanding of separation of powers and checks and balances.